What's up, guys? This is Chris from draftdashboard.com.
Here are my DFS picks for MLB Wednesday, August 25th.
These picks apply for DraftKings and FanDuel. Before I get started, please drop a like on this video and hit that red subscribe button
And hit that bell icon
so you don't miss our new videos.
In this video, I'm going to go over my top DFS picks for today's MLB slate.
And if you stick around to the very end of this video, we'll use the Draft Dashboard tools to make a DFS lineup using the picks we just made.
Okay guys, we have a 10-game slate tonight, so let's take a look at the pitcher position. Now, unfortunately, our pitcher Jack Flaherty got injured yesterday, so that's never good, but our bats went off. Brandon Belt had a huge night, so I've got a couple of pitcher picks for you here tonight. Well, I'm just going to go through the guys that I like. I like Walker Buehler, Zach Wheeler, Brandon Woodruff, and Luis Castillo. Now, if I'm going to pick one of those guys, it's probably going to be Brandon Woodruff, pitching against the Cincinnati Reds. Brandon Woodruff is only giving up a .527 OPS versus lefties and a .618 OPS versus righties. He's facing 4 lefties and 5 righties, and on top of that, the Reds have only hit 15 of his last 61 pitches. That's a .246 batting average. He's $10,300 FanDuel salary and 100 less on DraftKings. Projected at 38.4 fantasy points here tonight. He has an ERA of 2.48. His record is 7-7 on the season, pitching an average of 94 pitches per game, averaging 38 fantasy points per game. Now, he's been struggling the past couple of games, only scored 9 and 18 fantasy points in the last 2 games, but he put up a 43 the game before that. And I like this pick because Vegas thinks this is going to be a low-scoring game. Only 7.5 runs scored in this game. That's their over-under. So I like Brandon Woodruff here versus the Cincinnati Reds. Okay, now if you want to go with Luis Castillo and save a little bit of salary, these guys are all pretty expensive, but they're all in pretty good spots here. Luis Castillo has a 6% pitching advantage over the Milwaukee Brewers. Luis Castillo, he's giving up a .740 OPS versus lefties and a .637 OPS versus righties. He's facing 5 lefties and 4 righties. And one of the reasons I like this pick is because the Brewers have only hit 31 of his last 132 pitches. That's a .235 batting average and a huge sample size. He's $9,700 FanDuel salary, 400 less on DraftKings, projected at 36.2 fantasy points here tonight. He has an ERA of 4.36, record is 7-12 on the season, pitching an average of 95 pitches per game, averaging 29 fantasy points per game, but he scored 49 and 39 fantasy points in the last 2 games. And Vegas thinks this is going to be a low-scoring game. Only 7.5 runs scored in this game. That's their over-under. So I like Luis Castillo here versus the Milwaukee Brewers. Okay, let's take a look at the catcher first base position. I like JT Realmuto with a 35% batting advantage over Ryan Yarbrough. JT Realmuto is batting 19% better versus lefty pitchers, batting a .937 OPS versus lefties. And Ryan Yarbrough, he pitches his worst ball versus righty batters. 16% worse than his other pitches, giving up a .766 OPS versus righties. Now, JT Realmuto is only 1 for 6 versus Yarbrough, and he's $3,500 FanDuel salary, $1,700 more on DraftKings, projected at 11.3 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 10 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 6, 34, and 13 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So his batter versus pitcher stats aren't very good, but it's a relatively small sample size with only 6 at-bats, and the splits are good here, so I like JT Realmuto here versus Ryan Yarborough. Okay, now I got a value play for you. Take a look at Jacob Stallings with an 81% batting advantage over a low-salary pitcher, Tyler Gilbert. Jacob Stallings is batting 14% better versus lefty pitchers, batting a .774 OPS versus lefties, and Tyler Gilbert, he pitches his worst ball versus righty batters, giving up a .814 OPS versus righties. There's no at-bats versus Gilbert yet, and Jacob Stallings is only $2,400 FanDuel salary. He's $1,200 more on DraftKings, projected at 9.2 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 8 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 3, 13, and 6 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I like Jacob Stallings as a value play here versus Tyler Gilbert. Okay, let's take a look at the second base position. I like Colton Wong with an 8% batting advantage over Luis Castillo. So if you're going to play Luis Castillo, don't recommend playing Colton Wong. But if you aren't going to play Luis, Colton Wong is batting a .734 OPS versus righties, and Luis Castillo, he pitches 14% worse to lefties as he does righties, giving up a .740 OPS versus lefties. Now, the reason I like this pick is because Colton Wong is 9 for 22 with a .409 batting average and a 1.227 OPS versus Castillo. He's $3,300 FanDuel salary, and he's only $600 more on DraftKings. Projected at 10.4 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 11 fantasy points per game on the season, but he's been on fire, scoring 32, 41, and 22 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I like Colton Wong here versus Luis Castillo.
Real quick, guys, I got great news. For a limited time, we're offering a full 30-day trial to Draft Dashboard. You can try all of our DFS tools for all sports. You can try the Position Optimizer, where you can see the top players ranked for each position. And we added a new Player Trends tool, where you can see the top salary differences between FanDuel and DraftKings. It's a really good tool to help you pick out value for the site that you're playing on. Oh, and if you're tired of doing research every day, we just added a cheat sheet that shows hand-picked plays for the slate. No confusing stat lines, no headaches, just a simple cheat sheet that shows the absolute best players for your lineups.
Now I also like Jorge Polanco with a 15% batting advantage over Nick Pivetta. Jorge Polanco is batting a .712 OPS versus righties, and Nick Pivetta, he pitches his worst ball versus switch hitters. 24% worse than his other pitches, giving up a 1.051 OPS versus switch hitters. And I like this pick because although it is a small sample size, Jorge Polanco is 3 for 3 with a 3.667 OPS versus Pivetta. One of those hits is a triple, and another one is a home run. He's $3,500 FanDuel salary, only $100 more on DraftKings. Projected at 9.4 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 12 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 29, 19, and 0 fantasy points in the last 3 games. And Vegas thinks this is going to be a high-scoring game, 10.5 runs scored in this game. That's their over-under. So I like Jorge Polanco here versus Nick Pivetta. Okay, let's take a look at the third base position. I like Rafael Devers with a 40% batting advantage over a low-salary pitcher, Bailey Auber. Rafael Devers is batting 23% better versus righty pitchers, batting a .922 OPS versus righties. And Bailey Auber, he throws 18% worse to lefties as he does righties, giving up a .835 OPS versus lefties. Now, there's no at-bats versus Auber yet, And Rafael Devers is $4,000 FanDuel salary. He's $1,900 more on DraftKings. Projected at 10.5 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 12 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 19, 16, and 0 fantasy points in the last 3 games. Then we know Vegas thinks there's going to be 10.5 runs scored in this game, so I like Rafael Devers here versus Bailey Auber. I also like Ke'Bryan Hayes with an 80% batting advantage over a low-salary pitcher, Tyler Gilbert. Ke'Bryan Hayes is batting 13% better versus lefty pitchers, batting a .996 OPS versus lefties, and Tyler Gilbert, he's giving up a .814 OPS versus righties. Now there's no at-bats versus Gilbert yet, and Ke'Bryan Hayes is $2,800 FanDuel salary. He's $1,200 more on DraftKings. Projected at 11.4 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 8 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 15, 22, and 3 fantasy points in his last 3 games. So I like Ke'Bryan Hayes here versus Tyler Gilbert. Okay, let's take a look at the shortstop position. I like Jean Segura with a 28% batting advantage over Ryan Yarbrough. Jean Segura is batting 12% better versus lefty pitchers, batting a .850 OPS versus lefties. And Ryan Yarbrough, he pitches his worst ball versus righty batters, 16% worse than his other pitches, giving up a .766 OPS versus righties. Jean Segura is 1 for 3 with a .666 OPS versus Yarbrough. That one hit was a single, and he's $3,200 FanDuel salary, $1,600 more on DraftKings. Projected at 10.5 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 10 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 0, 6, and 9 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I like Jean Segura here versus Ryan Yarbrough. Now I also like Amed Rosario, but at the time of this recording, we don't have a pitcher on the slate for him yet, but it does look like he's been on fire, scoring 9, 28, and 31 fantasy points in the last 3 games. And if he's going to be facing a lefty pitcher, then he's going to be in a real good spot here tonight. He's only $3,200 FanDuel salary and $800 more on DraftKings, but we got to wait for that pitcher to confirm, so keep an eye on that. If he's facing a lefty pitcher, Amed Rosario is in a good spot tonight. Okay, moving on to the outfield position. I like Kyle Schwarber with a 41% batting advantage over a low-salary pitcher, Bailey Auber. Kyle Schwarber is batting 23% better versus righty pitchers, batting a .872 OPS versus righties. And Bailey Auber, he's pitching 18% worse to lefties as he does righties, giving up a .835 OPS versus lefties. There's no at-bats versus Auber yet, and Kyle Schwarber is $3,500 FanDuel salary, $1,200 more on DraftKings. Projected at 10.4 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 12 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 6, 6, and 3 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I like Kyle Schwarber here versus Bailey Auber. Now, Lamont Wade Jr. is also in a good spot. He's got good splits here tonight. Lamont Wade Jr. has a 77% batting advantage over Tajon Walker. Lamont Wade Jr. bats 63% better versus righty pitchers, batting a .808 OPS versus righties. And Tajon Walker, he pitches his worst ball versus lefty batters, 14% worse than his other pitches, giving up a .733 OPS versus lefties. Now there's no at-bats versus Walker yet, and Lamont Wade Jr. is $3,400 FanDuel salary, $600 more on DraftKings, projected at 7.8 fantasy points here tonight. I think that projection is a little bit low, but you never know with these projections in MLB. You just got to take him with a grain of salt. He's averaging 10 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 25, 0, and 22 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So just a quick note, I like that DraftKings price. So I like Lamont Wade Jr. here versus Tajon Walker. I also like Alex Verdugo with a 44% batting advantage over that low salary pitcher, Bailey Auber. So I think there's an opportunity to stack a couple or 2 or 3 lefty batters here versus Bailey Auber. Alex Verdugo, he's batting 26% better versus righty pitchers, batting a .898 OPS versus righties. And Bailey Auber, he's giving up a .835 OPS versus lefties. There's no at-bats versus Auber yet. And Alex Verdugo is $3,000 FanDuel salary, $500 more on DraftKings. So I like that DraftKings price. I like that price on both sites, but especially that DraftKings price. And he's projected at 9.7 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 10 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 31, 34, and 0 fantasy points in the last 3 games. And we know Vegas thinks there's going to be 10.5 runs scored in this game. That's their over-under. So I like Alex Verdugo here versus Bailey Auber. Now I also like Brandon Nimmo with a 19% batting advantage over Johnny Cueto. Brandon Nimmo is batting 13% better versus righty pitchers, batting a .868 OPS versus righties. And Johnny Cueto, he's giving up a .762 OPS versus lefties. There's no at-bats versus Cueto yet, and Brandon Nimmo is only $2,800 FanDuel salary. He's $1,300 more on DraftKings, projected at 10.7 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 9 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 3, 18, and 34 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I like Brandon Nimmo here versus Johnny Cueto.
If you want to try all these daily fantasy tools for yourself, click the link in the description below this video or just go to draftdashboard.com. You can use our DFS lineup optimizer to build quality lineups using our picks and your own custom player pool. Click the link in the description below this video and try all these daily fantasy tools right now. Thanks so much for watching. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel and hit that bell icon so you can get instant updates whenever we post a new video. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, please smash that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Oh, and please comment below with your favorite player for this NBA slate. I love to hear what you guys have to think. Thanks again, and good luck.